Okay, can you all see my PowerPoint?
Can now.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna enter full screen and let me know if you can still see it. No.
That was some light reading you sent there.
Yeah.
Whoa.
We're gonna go through it.
Well chosen.
Yes.
Thank you.
See, I
thought I knew how to read, but
surprise.
so you guys, if you get an opportunity to do DOD, which is Department of Defense, looking at research grants.
Oh yeah, that was fun.
Good training. I just did that in December, so this was kind of a piece of cake because I had to look at 15 abstracts. And
You sat right across from me. I know. That was an intriguing.
But you weren't in the liver. You were someplace else. See, I had liver, which I knew nothing about.
Oh, okay. I had colon cancer. I thought you were in a meeting with me.
So if you guys have any comments or things based on that experience throughout this as well, feel free to jump in. Because like I said, this is definitely a more laid back discussion that we'll have on this research article, but anything you can pull from your experiences on DOD or whatnot will be super helpful as well. Cool. So I think everyone knows everyone on the call, but just for heads up, I'm Reese Garcia, the Research Advocacy Manager. And today we're talking research articles. If I can, there we go. So just an overview of today's Learning Lab. We'll go through what a scientific paper is, as well as the different types of research literature. And I believe some of you back at the very beginning of when I started in August joined the poster presentation Learning Lab. And that definitely falls into types of research literature, which we'll get into today. But if you haven't seen that Learning Lab yet, go back and look for it. And if you don't know where it's at, let me know and I'll send it to you. We will also be discussing the audience for research articles, as well as how to determine credibility, the typical format that research follows. And then we will go through tips for reading through the research and then reviewing and critiquing articles. And then we will have time at the end for discussion. So the goal of today for this Learning Lab is that at the end you all understand the differences between credible versus non-credible research, and are able to identify the sections that make up research articles and scientific papers, as well as be able to read through research literature to understand what was investigated and why, and then be able to ask your own questions and critically think about the research and what it means for the cancer community. Okay, so a research article, as many of you know, and a lot of you, I'm sure this is, a very broad overview of articles that you've already spent time reading through and working through, but articles that cover research are papers that share the work of scientists and research with others. So it's a summary of data and research relating to a specific area, but it also gives a general overview of the current state of the science, as well as any gaps that might exist in the field, as well as next steps for researchers. So like I said, there's an array of different types of research literature and reports. We're covering research papers today, and these are often subjected to peer review. So what I mean by that is these go through a process, and a board or a panel looks at them to determine if they meet a certain criteria to be passed through and published by a journal. So for example, last year, some of you may know, the immunotherapy blueprint was a paper written by Fight CRC and Cancer Research Institute. Well, that was a paper that had to go through the peer review process to be published by Cancer Research Immunology. So that's kind of the process that research articles make their way through before you ever see them in a journal or online. We also have posters, and I briefly touched on that. And then we also have oral presentations. So for those of you that have been to conferences, which I believe is all of you, oral presentations are oftentimes presentations that you can go to on the side. So for example, ASCO, there's a few that are relating to colorectal cancer research, abstracts in particular that we'll be going to. But then we also have reviews. And these are different in the sense that they explain the existing knowledge of research and where research is at for a particular subject. And it's a collection of research. So I want to show you an example of a review. Okay. Can you all see? Probably not. Let's see here. Okay. Can you all see my internet yet or no?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So this is PubMed, and this is a database that's actually run by the NIH. It's a really good resource if you guys haven't been to PubMed before. But what they do that's really cool is in this sidebar, so I had searched for an article, and this is actually a review, and you'll notice that it's set up similar to research. So you have your abstract, you have your introduction, and then you have a conclusion. But one thing that PubMed does that's really cool is they identify reviews versus original research. So you'll see here, there's a blue bar and it says review versus this right here, which is original research. So whenever you're looking through PubMed, it's really beneficial to know what's original research and what's a review. And like I said, reviews are not original research. They're collections of research that has been done. So let me go back to my PowerPoint. And okay. So those are the different types of research literature that you'll come across as research advocates. Your audience, the audience of research articles varies quite a bit. So like I said, you have your editorial board reviewers, and these are the people that are sitting on panels and reading through the research to determine if it fits the criteria to be published in a journal. Research colleagues, but then you also have the broad research scientist, clinician population that are looking at these research articles to better understand the state of the science. But then you also have the lay audience like ourselves who may not have a science background, but wants to understand the overview of research articles to be able to communicate it out, serve as patient advocates, or serve as their own advocate. So one thing to keep in mind, and I know I've mentioned this in some of my emails I've sent out to you, but it's always important to keep in mind what's credible and what's not credible. Generally, a rule of thumb is that materials that were published within the last 10 years are credible, and that's because anything outside of that 10-year time frame is, I'm getting feedback. Let me mute. Okay, can everyone
Actually,
still hear me?
10 years in colorectal cancer right now is kind of a lot.
It is. And so this is just the general rule of thumb for research overall. I typically, when I'm looking at research, I don't look past 2016, just because, like you said, Lyra, research has changed so much and so fast in colorectal cancer. But you can consider, and this is up to discretion as well. So if you're reading an article on, 10 years ago that says there are no immunotherapy options for patients with MSI, that's out of date. So it's definitely up to discretion. But if it were maybe a research article on exercise and survivorship benefits that was published in 2011, it's not something I would fully discredit yet. I would have to look further into the research to see what it was saying. But then on the other end of that spectrum, anything outside of 10 years is typically deemed not credible anymore because the science does change so fast. Other credible sources include articles that were written by respected and well-known authors. So for those of you that have been in the research world for a while, you'll start to pick up on oncologists and researchers and clinicians that are well respected in the community, and you'll recognize their names and be able to tell right away if it's a credible source. And then websites that are registered by government or educational institutions, so .gov, .edu, are very credible, as well as academic, Search Premier, and PubMed, so those academic databases like we just saw. And then materials from Google Scholar are credible as well. So on the other side of that, you have your non-credible sources, out-of-date materials, Facebook, social networks, if the link from a Facebook page is to a research site, to a .edu, I mean, in that case, it is credible. But if it's just an article shared on Facebook and it's from a news source in, the middle of nowhere, I wouldn't necessarily deem that credible by any means. You have to be careful with blogs. So we're lucky at Fight CRC that all of our blogs are medically reviewed and are credible. But if you are looking at external sources, blogs can sometimes be opinion-based and therefore are not credible research sources. And then articles without citations or from websites ending.com, .org, .net always steer on the side of caution. So these are just things to keep in mind when reading through the research and weighing whether or not it's accurate and up to date and timely and has been peer reviewed. Okay, so research articles and research in general typically follows the same format in general. So one thing I actually learned at this last conference I was at is this acronym called I'm RAD. So all research is going to start with a title and generally an abstract, which we'll get into in a minute, but then they'll follow this path. So there'll be an introduction, a method section, a results section, and a discussion section. So if you're ever wondering how to remember the flow of research, you can use this acronym I'm RAD, and it really helps. Sometimes, and we'll get into this in a few moments as well, there is also a conclusion, and that is, sometimes it's hard to differentiate the discussion from the conclusion, but we'll get into that. Okay.
I just, guys, my internet went when you pulled up the internet on your side. It just disconnected everything on me.
Oh no.
So I'm just on the phone now, but I'm trying to get back in. So I might bounce around a little bit.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Flo.
Okay.
We have this recording as well, so you'll be able to catch what you missed. So the abstract, like I mentioned, this is a high-level overview of the paper. So it's a quick snapshot of what the research article is talking about. And oftentimes it includes the background, the methods, the results, and the conclusion. So I want to show you a few different types of abstracts because they're not going to all look the same, even though they do follow the general format. So this is the abstract taken from the article today. So you can see in their abstract here, they start with importance, objective, and then they name their method section, design, setting, and participants. And then they go into results and discussion. But then if you look at this abstract, which is taken from an ASCO abstract that will be presented this year, they have background, methods, results, conclusions, follows that pretty straightforward path. So they're not all going to be titled the same thing. I mean, we have importance versus background and methods versus design setting. But you can generally expect to see this format in some way. And then here, the ASCO meeting library has a really good layout for their abstracts. They break it up very clearly and concisely. So background, methods, results, conclusion. And if you haven't, and if you're going to ASCO and haven't looked at the abstracts yet, I highly recommend it because they're released now and there's some good ones. Okay, so the next section in a research paper is the introduction, and this provides the overview of concepts as well as the research question that the researchers are trying to answer. And oftentimes there will be a short literature review, so they'll provide a background on the current research and what's known, and then that's when they dive into the need for research and why they're conducting this investigation. So in this article I sent you all, you can see here that they provide kind of the state of the science. So they talk about past studies that have been done. One cool thing that this article does that you may not see in a lot of other research articles is they provide this key points box. So it gives you another quick snapshot of the investigation, but they put here their question. So this goes back to their research question and what they're trying to find out here, if there's a significant difference in colorectal cancer incidence between individuals with advanced or non-advanced adenomas compared to those with no adenomas. And we'll go into those results shortly. So this is what the introduction looks like. You'll notice that they don't title it introduction, and that's okay. Some do, some don't. So the next section is methods, and this is the design. This is considered the recipe for how research is done. It allows others to duplicate the study. And, oh, I'm getting feedback. And it describes how participants were gathered, how data was collected, and how data was analyzed. But this is just the method section. So it's basically the recipe of the research. So here you can see in our methods section, they describe what type of study it was. So this specific one we're looking at today was a prospective cohort study. And when we get into the discussion later, I'll talk about what this means. They describe how they randomized individuals, their participants, and then what they were looking for. But there's no discussion of results or anything yet until you get to results. And this describes who the subjects were and who ended up participating ultimately. Oftentimes results can be broken up into qualitative or quantitative results. And what I mean by that is qualitative you can think of as numbers. So 30% of participants were men, 70% were women, whereas quantitative is oftentimes more rich data. So for those of you that might have participated in a focus group, your responses from that focus group would be considered qualitative. So qualitative, I think of quantity, quantitative numbers. Does anyone have any questions on that? Cool. In the results section, you'll also get statistical analysis and levels of statistical significance. And this is one thing I did want to cover in terms of statistics, because it comes up in almost any quantitative research paper you're going to read, and that's the p-value. So the p-value is given a number, and typically researchers use the cutoff of 0.05. So anything under a p-value of 0.05 is considered statistically significant. And what that means is the probability that these findings could be reproduced is less than 5 in 100. So basically, they're not random. 95 out of 100 times these findings are replicable. Sometimes researchers will use higher or lower p-values, but the general rule of thumb is that a p-value less than 0.05 is statistically significant, and that the findings are not random and that they can be replicated. Does that make sense? The p-value is a very, to me, it was a very abstract construct to grasp, but it's pretty straightforward if you use this definition.
I had trouble trying to take statistics, so I remember.
You and me both. Just remember the rule of thumb: a p-value less than 0.05 is statistically significant. Say that.
I think I can handle that.
Yep. Okay, awesome. And we'll discuss the p-value as it relates to this article as well. So keep in mind, in the results section, there's rarely any discussion of what the results mean. There shouldn't be any discussion of what the results mean. That is what the discussion is for. So you can see here from the article, this is their results. They describe who actually ended up being included in the study. Here it says in total 16,000 participants ended up having a follow-up colonoscopy after the FSG screening. And then you'll see a lot of tables and charts and graphs in the results section. This is where the data lies. And then the discussion is the interpretation of the results. So this provides what does the data mean? What is it saying? What are future research implications? And then discussion also includes limitations. So no study is perfect, and strong studies will include limitations. And sometimes you'll see limitations that include small sample size. So maybe they weren't able to get enough participants to statistically say that this would apply to the broader population. In this case, they had a very large population, so that was not a limitation, but they do have a limitation section. And then discussions also will include next steps. So what does this research mean going forward? What are the implications? And who does this affect? So you can see here, this is the discussion. They discuss what the data mean, what it means on a broad level. But then I wanted to show you, they also include conclusion. And the conclusion is the so what takeaway message. And it's only, 2 sentences, but it tells you exactly what you need to know. And as we'll see as we go into tips to read through research articles, everyone has a different way of moving through the abstract and the introduction and so forth to the conclusion. But you have to find out what works best for you by practicing. So personally, I start with the abstract and then I jump to the conclusion to get a broad sense of what they were looking for and what they found. But I know some people who don't read the abstract at all and just start at introduction and work their way through. So reading through research articles is definitely something you have to practice with and figure out what works best for you. I recommend taking notes and highlighting. So as you can see, I've done some serious highlighting in this document and taking notes, and it really helps to grasp what the article is trying to say, because if you just try to read it without any notes or anything to understand the process and flow, it's going to be very difficult at the end to regurgitate the high level overview. Taking your time and reading through these things is very important. I keep a list of vocab words handy, and I sent you all a list of the common vocab words. So if you just want to start a running list that you refer to constantly, that would be helpful. I recommend not getting caught up on complicated statistics. P-value is about as far as I go when it comes to yes.
Question.
Yeah.
When did you send us a vocabulary list?
I sent that yesterday.
Okay. I gotta look for it.
I'll send it to you again, and I can show you that
That's all right.
as we go through. And then the main goal after reading through this research article is to take away the main points from the paper. What did the researchers learn, and what does this mean moving forward? Another thing to keep in mind as you're reading through research articles is to critique the research articles you go through. So you have to look at if the evidence is strong. And to do that, you can see if the results are reliable and valid. Reliable looks at whether the findings can be repeated. And then valid looks at whether the measures can measure what they're supposed to. So for example, an easy way to put it is, does shoe size measure your ability to run fast? Probably not. So that's not necessarily a valid study. And so you have to look at whether the measurements make the research believable. Another thing to keep in mind is if the results are clinically relevant. So what does this mean for patients? How does this translate to patients? Is there any relevancy for the population based on this research? And then did the authors overall use a reasonable approach to conduct their study? Is there anything else that you would have liked to know, or other ways they could have investigated their research question? So with that being said, I'll see if there's any questions first on anything I presented. Cool. And then we will go ahead and get into, let's see if I can X out of this, into the research paper. So before I do that, I did want to touch on the prospective cohort study. So the article I sent you all is a prospective cohort study, and I also included examples of other types of study in that vocab sheet I sent you. But this study we're looking at today is prospective, meaning they started looking at patients in 2003 and followed them through 2013. So they started at a point in time and moved forward to watch the outcomes. So in this case, you'll see they started with patients at time 0, and then they followed them through 2013 to see if they had any polyps, and then if it developed into colorectal cancer. So that's what the design study of today is. Okay. So let me pull up this paper. Let's see. So were all of you able to at least look at the research article? Okay, awesome. So let's just start with this first question. So what do you guys think the problem broadly in the field of cancer research is trying to solve? And this is a very broad question, so don't think too hard into it.
They're trying to identify whether they can predict from early testing those who might develop colorectal cancer or not through the status of the adenoma?
Yeah, no, that's
or
great.
not. Yeah.
So let me pull up. Do you guys see the research article, or do you still see the PowerPoint presentation?
PowerPoint.
Okay. Here we go. Okay. So this article is great in the sense that it's pretty straightforward about what it's trying to look at. So you can see here, their goal, the issue in this scope of science is that the relationship between adenomas at colonoscopy and the long-term CRC incidence is unclear. And so I'd say that's the big issue that they're trying to look at. So then if we go back to our next question, what work has been done in this area before? Were you all able to pick out any areas where they might have discussed previous work that has been done? So I'm going to point out this guy right here. You can see where I've done my highlighting, granted on a computer. So here they go into the background of work that's been done before. So observational studies and randomized trials of endoscopic screening for CRC with colonoscopy or flex sig demonstrate a significant reduction in CRC incidence and mortality. So that's already known. The reduction in incidence is due to the removal of precursor lesion of colorectal cancer and adenomatous polyp. But then you come over here, and this is their question. This is what they want to know in this research article. Is there a significant difference in colorectal cancer incidence between individuals with either advanced or non-advanced adenomas compared with those with no adenomas? And the reason, so they go down, let's see here. Right here, the timing for surveillance colonoscopy should be based on the ensuring risk of developing CRC. So here's the problem. Few studies have examined CRC incidence after adenoma removal. So we've identified, go ahead, Lyra.
Nothing, that's okay.
Oh, so we've identified what the field is trying to solve and why this research is being done, as well as what work has been done in this area before. And then they lay it out pretty obvious what their question is, but I will say a lot of times research articles don't have the question as straightforward. So all of these questions that you want to keep in mind as you read through a research article, in this case, are all in the introduction. And that's a really good place to start because, like I said, the introduction lays out, the broad problem, research that's either lacking or that has been done before, as well as the question that they're going to solve.
Hey, Reese, I got a question.
Yeah.
The authors of the study, when you're looking at this and, someone puts this in front of you, how do you know if the authors of this study paper have written other studies, number one, and number two, where they're from and the experience that they've had?
That's a great question.
We trust it. It got published apparently in JAMA, but how do I know that Benjamin Click knows what he knows? I mean, I don't know how else to word it, but how do you know that all these people aren't all just from the same place, but that they have the level of experience and that we should trust them?
Yeah, that's a great question.
The fact that they've been selected and peer-reviewed and included in JAMA, would give me confidence.
Okay.
And then I'd say another thing that you can always do, so I'm going to reference back to PubMed because I love PubMed. Let me share my screen with you, my other screen. So Google is always your best friend, but if you can go to PubMed, let's see here. Oh boy, my computer. All right, it's not going to let me share screen, but what I recommend doing is going back to that PubMed that I showed you. and searching for the author. So
Okay.
let's see here. I can't share my screen, but when I search for the author in PubMed, Benjamin Click comes up for inflammatory bowel disease. He has a list of other articles that he's on. So I'd say doing some research into the previous articles they've published or previous articles they've been on, if you see consistently that they're being published by reputable sources and they are in PubMed, I would feel very confident saying that they're credible.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that was a great question. So let's see here. Are you guys still seeing, what screen are you seeing right now?
A complicated one.
Yeah, it's where you're supposed to be using tools.
Okay.
Stamp, measure, certificates, edit PDF, export.
Okay.
There.
There you go.
Perfect. Okay. So that was a good question. So we've identified, we've concluded that this is a reliable, credible source. It's coming from JAMA. JAMA is one of the gold standards for publishing scientific medical articles. We've looked up the authors, Benjamin Click. He's a reputable author based on PubMed findings. We've identified the research question and the need for the research question. So the next question is, how are they going to answer what they want to know? So how are they going to find out if there's a significant difference in CRC incidence between those with advanced and non-advanced adenomas versus those with none? So that's when we're going to move down to the methods, because the methods will tell you everything you need to know about how they're going to go about answering their research question.
So I'm just going to point out too, Reese, on the first page on the right, you had your author affiliations as well.
Oh, yes.
So
Yeah.
if you
Great
wanted
point. Oh, I
to
didn't see
know
Oh, it's gonna, yeah.
So you've got some really good indications of where they're coming from, what they've done, what university they're with, some other things right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't see that. Thanks.
It's hiding out there. And sometimes these will be at the beginning. Sometimes they'll be at the end towards the sources. Sometimes you have to do digging. In this case, it makes it very straightforward right there. So good point, Julie. That was a great point. Okay. So let's go down to the methods. So this is where I was describing the prospective cohort study. So this is a study population design. Oftentimes the methods will be broken out into different ways of things they're going to identify. So this is how they're going to design the participants that they're including. Right here, definition of exposure and study cohort. For this study, participants who had a positive FSG result at baseline or the year 3 or 5 examination and had a diagnostic colonoscopy within 1 year were included. So this is how you know who is included. They go through, they discuss their primary outcome is colorectal cancer incidence, but they also want to look at colorectal cancer mortality. Do any of you all have questions on the difference between incidence and mortality?
I think I might.
Sure. So,
Well, incidence is, well, go ahead.
no, it's all you.
Is incident just whether you develop cancer and then possibly continue to live, whereas the other are you answer the question.
No, that was good. That was, you're on track. So incidence is basically the number of new cases that are diagnosed each year. So incidence is, if you were to look back at 2009, the incidence would be how many new cases were developed in 2009. Mortality is how many people died from the disease. So here they're looking at, I can bring it back up.
But the incidence here refers back to this particular cohort, right?
Right. Yep. So they're
Okay.
looking at how many people developed colorectal cancer in a given year, and then their secondary outcome is how many people died from colorectal cancer.
Out of this cohort.
Correct. All right. So we'll scroll down. So you could go through all of these and see exactly how they're going to answer every single question they have. I will say that this research article is looking at a ton of different things, and you can see that just by the results. So let's move on to our next question, which is, what do you think the results mean? So like I said, this research article is looking at size of adenoma, presence of adenoma, location of adenoma. They're looking at a ton of different things in the study cohort. I'm choosing to just focus on their research question overall, which is, was there a difference between those with advanced/non-advanced adenomas compared to those with no adenomas? So let's scroll down here. So you'll see in the results, they tell you how many people participated. This is a really good chart, and I'm going to flip my view of it. Okay. So the results, like I said, will have an overview of how participants were allocated in different trial arms and what the end result was. You can see here that they randomized 154,000 participants. Only 77,000 were randomized to the intervention group. So that was the group that would receive the FSG and then the colonoscopy. And if you go over here, you can see that out of all the participants that were randomized, 2,217 had advanced adenoma, 3,300 had non-advanced, and 4,800 had no adenoma. And then this second part of the results are, oh my God, a dog going, were year 3 or 5.
So, got another question.
Yes.
So, when you follow a group of people for 10 years, like the study did, do they wait till those 10 years are over and then take a couple years to formulate the results, or do they do it ongoing?
It's ongoing, looks like here.
So if somebody passes away after year 3, is that waiting? Are you going to wait till the end of the study and find out that that 3 is part of the people who passed away, or does it go every year? They monitor it and then kind of do a semi-result of it. Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering if it's from 2013 and it's now 2018. When was this all brought together with the answer? Do you know what I mean? I'm trying to say it, but it's not coming out right.
I think I know. I think I understand the gist of your question. So the way it works is they start at time 0, and that's when they randomize the patient. Okay. But you'll see here, so at baseline, they had 12,000 decline. So they knew when they were, pushing people forward to undergo the FSG, they knew in that moment that 12,000 people declined.
Okay.
And, certain people will die throughout. And that's something that's ongoing, that's kept up to date throughout the study.
Okay.
But like, for example, you go down here to time 3 and year 3 and year 5. This information isn't gathered until year 3 or year 5. And then by the end of follow-up is when they're able to see if patients developed colorectal cancer. So it's prospective in the sense that at baseline, they have information, they're gathering information throughout, but the end is when they're able to see what the outcome was, which is colorectal cancer incidence or mortality.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sure. That was a good question. So I'm going to rotate this back, but you'll see in the results they have, and not all studies have their results outlined like this, but if you are going through the results, I highly recommend looking through this because the visual aids are very helpful in understanding who was included and what the outcomes were. And so have any of you read through the result? Were any of you able to read through the results, the findings?
Mm.
Julie, did you read through the findings?
I did read through the findings.
So my question then is, what do you think of these results? What do you think they mean? And do you agree with the findings in the discussion?
Well, I was I didn't think that, just for me here, I didn't think that this really proved much of anything, where they were talking about no adenomas and advanced adenomas. The percentages of developing colorectal cancer, at least I was interrupted, so you have to understand I'm at work and I'm a fireman, so I get interrupted all the time. But they really were not that significantly different, in my opinion, of people developing colorectal cancer. based upon that. But you're looking at a lot of other factors in there. You've got BMI, you've got age, you've got sex, you've got smoking, you've got aspirin taking, you've got a lot of other factors that influence there. So I don't know that that colonoscopy and findings of a one or two, a polyp that is greater than 1 centimeter. And I went back to my colonoscopy, which, initially I was told was, would have been a non-advanced adenoma. Then when I was diagnosed, they changed it to an advanced adenoma. But when I'm reading the criteria here, it was a non-advanced adenoma. And the correlation between what happened afterwards, I can't say that based upon the study question, that they answered that question, because there's too many other factors in here.
And you bring up a good point. They're measuring so many factors that it's kind of hard to understand if what they measured and what they found is even relevant, if it does answer that research question. So I'm going to address that in two parts. So you mentioned the size. So and
the number was what determined whether they were advanced or not advanced.
And so you're right in the sense for the size that they found no significant. Oh,
yeah, I didn't mention it all because there is whether.
There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
So in terms of size, I don't think this was necessarily a finding that directly influenced their question, and they didn't find a significant difference between polyps that were less than 1 centimeter or greater than 1 centimeter. And so what they're suggesting here is that there's no significant difference in risk compared to those with a large adenoma versus a smaller adenoma, and therefore those with a smaller adenoma should be followed just as closely because the risk is the same. But then when you get to the difference in, let me turn my screen again, the difference in an advanced versus non-advanced, what I want to point out, and this table is really, really helpful, and it takes some time to go through tables like this because all you see are numbers. And that's why I pointed out the p-value, because I think that's probably one of the most helpful aspects in understanding this. So
I did have one question though, Reese, before you go on, because they use this value all the way through. What is this 95 CL or CI, 95% CI?
Yeah, so that's a confidence interval, and that the 95% confidence interval is the opposite of the 0.05 p-value. So they use a confidence interval to say we're 95% confident that the true value of the statistic lies between X and Z. And so then on the opposite side of that, there's only a 5% chance that this value is not significant. So it gets more complicated when you bring in confidence intervals and relating them to p-values. But just know that 95% confidence interval is pretty standard. And that's the confidence. Researchers are 95% confident that the true value will lie in the range. So for example, here, their rate difference is 2.4. So the range, the 95% confidence interval, which you can see here, is 0.2 to 4.6, and they're 95% confident that this range will continue to fall into here. That's where you get kind of caught into the statistics of the science. But if we focus on p-value, so to give you some bearings, we have advanced adenoma up here, and we have non-advanced adenoma here, and then you scroll over and you have no adenoma. Right here you have RD versus no adenoma, and I didn't know intuitively what RD was, but here you go down, a lot of times tables will have definitions. So RD is rate difference, RR rate ratio. So what they're looking at here is what is the rate difference of developing colorectal cancer between having an advanced adenoma compared to no adenoma, which is being used as the reference. So you can see here that the rate difference is 2.4, whereas the rate ratio is 2.6. What you really want to look at is this p-value right here. So the p-value for the rate difference of having an advanced adenoma versus no adenoma is p-value of 0.03. That means this difference is statistically significant, which if we go back to our PowerPoint and our vocab slides, that means that there is a 95% chance that these findings will be replicated out of 100 times, 95 times these findings will be replicated, and there will be that difference. So you can see the takeaway is that the difference between advanced adenoma and no adenoma, for each size, the p-value is less than 0.05, except for this one, which we would have to do more digging to understand why this one wasn't significant. But what this is saying is that there is a difference in developing colorectal cancer between those with an advanced adenoma versus no adenoma. And so then when you come down here, rotate again. When you come down here, you see that compared with participants with no adenoma, those with advanced adenoma were at significantly increased risk of CRC death. So the risk was much higher with those with advanced adenoma, however, not with those with non-advanced adenoma. So this is the bulk of what they're trying to answer. So if we scroll back up here to their question, which was, is there a significant difference in colorectal cancer incidence and mortality between individuals with advanced or non-advanced adenomas compared to those with no adenomas? The answer is yes, with advanced, there is a difference, but they're not seeing a difference with non-advanced. And so that's where it gets kind of in the weeds, is when you're looking at a table like this. So my recommendation is that when you do see a table like this with a bunch of numbers and values, you start high. So you look at what they're looking at. Let's see here. You start high with what they're looking at. Okay, advanced adenoma, non-advanced adenoma. Rate difference versus no adenoma. And then I go to the p-value to see if it's significant. And then when you come down to the results, that's where these results are put into words. So then let's go down to discussion. This is where the meat of the results comes out. So this is what this means for patients. You can see here that participants with advanced adenoma detected at colonoscopy were at significantly increased risk of subsequent colorectal cancer compared to those with no adenoma. Participants with non-advanced adenoma did not have a significantly different risk compared to those with no. So this is what the discussion is used for, is it's taking those results and interpreting them for people to understand in words. And then let's come down here. We have our limitations, but the conclusions. This is the bulk of what they were trying to do. And like you said, Julie, yes, they were looking at BMI and they were looking at size of polyps, but the ultimate research question was if there was a difference between the stages of adenoma, and there was for those with advanced, but not with non-advanced. And therefore, this is the takeaway message. And so they don't necessarily have an implications here for what this means for patients, but they do give you the take-home point, and it does answer this question all the way up here, which they laid out very nicely for us. So what questions or comments do you guys have as you were reading through this, or as we were going through this today?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can.
Okay. What I was centered on is, how will this study change the way we diagnose or treat? I was thinking, how would this study be useful for oncologists today? Is it going to make a huge difference in the way we treat adenoma or colon cancer?
That's a great question, Elaine, and that's definitely something that you want to be thinking about as you're reading all research studies. I can't definitively say this research study alone will change the way oncologists think about adenomas, but it does add to the growing literature that supports that, advanced adenomas have a much higher risk of resulting in colorectal cancer. So while this one research piece may not have a direct effect, it's a cumulative effect. So the more research that can support adenomas, advanced adenomas leading to colorectal cancer, may change how frequent oncologists decide to redo a colonoscopy. So, for example, in this finding, they found no difference in colorectal cancer incidence in participants with advanced adenoma, whether it was 1 centimeter larger or smaller. So they say here that European guidelines let patients that have a smaller adenoma return at a 10-year surveillance interval, whereas those with greater than 1 small are able to return sooner. So they're saying here that what needs to change is that no matter how big your adenoma is, you still need to be monitored regularly for the risk. So they offer suggestions for ways that oncology can change, but it's not necessarily going to be an overnight drastic one research study does it all, unless it is like a clinical trial that has substantial results and that can be replicated and are replicated before a drug goes to FDA approval. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Reese, I got another question.
Yeah.
One of the things that we looked at when we do DOD research papers and the like is they always tell us to concentrate on impact to the patient.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're reading these results and they're saying, yes, there's a difference, no, there's not, and maybe it goes in a whole batch of other papers that come after this comes out to the public, but the things I would look to find is, okay, so if there's the impact, what are you suggesting? Are you suggesting, like you said, more colonoscopies more frequently? Are you suggesting different drugs? Are you suggesting surgery? I mean, is that something that's usually in a study paper like this, or is that something that's actually in a clinical trial?
Can I speak to the DOD real quick?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So in the DOD, we were looking at high risk, high reward grant applications, not studies that had already, we weren't looking at really results of studies. So these were people who were looking to get grant money, and they specifically go to the DOD for high risk, high rewards, at least in the group that I worked in.
Yeah.
These were high risk in that, they weren't really clinical trials at this point. Very few were clinical trials, but we were evaluating whether they had the potential to continue in their research. So they were looking at past studies. We were looking at who were the study participants. A lot of times these were new researchers. So we were looking at who was, behind them, whether they had a lot of experience. So it was a different, it's from a different perspective than a paper that is based upon clinical trials and research data.
That's kind of what I was looking for in the answer. Is it a different beast all within itself, or
it is.
Yeah, and I'm getting that feeling, but I just wanted to make sure I was on the right track with it.
You are.
Okay, thank you.
Very different.
Good question. So we have 2 minutes left, and I do want to be respectful of time. So I'll just see if anyone has any other questions or comments on this paper or broadly the research process articles in general. I think you guys had some really great questions and comments today.
All right, guys, I have to go because I have another hour-and-a-half meeting here, so I'm going to be leaving you.
Sounds great.
Right.
Bye, Julie.
Bye, guys. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Okay.
How
Bye.
about you all? Any other questions before we conclude today?
This was really helpful. Maybe we can go through one or two more of these in one of our future ones, because it really helps a lot to understand the differences in the way they group things together and even part of the statistics. So it was really helpful.